according to the picture on the banner, I have Patrick here. He's the Chief Product and Technology Officer for Irembo. I have Remy here. He's the co-founder of Pindo, which is one of the scaling SMS applications here in Rwanda. And at the far end, we have Musoke. He's the head of infrastructure at Oltranz. So without wasting much time, I want to do something a bit generic. A lot of us here have built applications to scale. Do you have a burning question you want to ask them upfront so that we'll put it in the agenda of the session? Does anyone have a burning question? All right.
My burning question actually burns me a lot. It's like no Remy and my brother on the other side are having applications which are serving people. Like let's say for a startup starting from scratch, how long can it take someone to build it and put it to the market so that it can be productive? I mean, and by productive I mean lucrative. Not only being productive, serving with not a really financial purpose, but lucrative, making money.
All right, thank you for that. Without wasting much time, I believe these are three people with three different expertise. Remy will be focusing on application, Andrew will be focusing on infrastructure, and Patrick will be focusing on teams and processes. So Remy, what is scalability? Let's start from there.
Okay, nice. Thank you for having me here. And yeah, I think scalability, the whole idea behind scalability is to meet your user experience needs without any change within your application, even though the number of users are growing, so that you don't have challenges around bugging or maybe having a slowing application.
All right, so Patrick, around building teams that are able to scale, what is your insight towards scalability?
Thank you. So I think that in terms of teams, the main challenge is to see how you use a few people to do more, how do we use less people to do more. So, and because if you just grow the teams, right, you're going to have the whole world to work for you. But how to use tools, processes, framework, and other technologies to be able to leverage them, and with the same number of people, doing more. But also sometimes it's not enough to have the tools. Sometimes you need more people, and then when you bring more people in one team, the dynamic of the team can change. And you also to think about how do you absorb more people in your team so that it doesn't disrupt the existing processes. Yeah. And all of this, you need to be very intentional on how you plan it, how you organize it, yeah, so that people find their way, through the process.
Talking more about doing more with less, which companies would you say are pointers to that in Africa and maybe in the world at large?
The first one I would say it's Irembo. So the amount of work that you are doing with our people, I think that's really very, very great what you are doing. We are able to leverage technologies. We are not yet where we want to be, but we are starting to go there, right? So, and we want to be able to grow that 10 times, not before the same team, but with more people and better processes. The other one I have in mind is WhatsApp or Instagram. When they were purchased by Facebook, they were around 10 or less than 20 engineers working at WhatsApp, and they were serving millions of people in the world. So the question that we should ask, how come 13 people are serving millions users in the world? Those are the kind of things that you are looking forward as Irembo to see. You want to emulate this kind of growth. Yeah.
Okay. Going to Andrew, infrastructure is one thing. You can build the best software in the world, and if you don't have a place to run it, you are back to where you started. So tell us, what do you feel scalability is with infrastructure in your view?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, like you said, you can build the best applications, but from an infrastructure perspective, what we're trying to do is when you're running an application that is serving 10 people, and you're running an application that's serving 1 million people, the infrastructure should be able to serve without any competition or overload the applications that are serving these people, right? And another thing that is very critical for infrastructure is you need to have a cost, the unit cost for one customer that you're serving to be exactly the same when you start serving a million customers. So that is what scalability is on infrastructure.
Okay, wouldn't you think serving more people and maybe, so I'm thinking like a market man. I believe when I scale or do this kind of things, I reduce cost, like the principle of buying in bulk and reducing your cost. Don't you think that applies with regards to scaling in infrastructure?
Yeah, definitely. So I was talking about the unit cost. So mostly when you're doing MVPs, you're going to have an infrastructure that is over provisioned for your purpose. And then when you start to scale up the infrastructure, serve multiple people, then you, depending on how you do it, you start to take advantage of those economies of scale, having more for less, like project ready.
Okay, I would like to come back to Remy. A lot of people here who are software engineers, they have heard vague words like vertical, horizontal, scaling. Can you maybe give a bit of context around that?
Yeah. So yeah, I think like context around like vertical and horizontal scaling. So like it first starts on your development product. So most of us like we start building on our local host, and then things to work properly. And then when you have your application ships in production, that's when you start like seeing complications. And then most of them will be like, okay, it worked in my machine, but like it's not really working. And most of the issues maybe like related to like number of users you're having, but that's some of the performance issue. And so around like horizontal scaling, most of the time like building on our machines, so you have maybe like an 8 GB RAM machine, and then you can even perform the bench working text there, and it's worked properly. And then when you ship to a server, and then with like more loads, more database, and you're at the point where, okay, you start maybe with 4 GB CPU for your server, and then you get to a point where users are growing, and then you need to scale either vertically by increasing the amount of memory, or either horizontally. But for us, like one of the paths we chose was more like how do we scale like over with Kubernetes, right? So how do we have like more nodes like attaching to?
Maybe before going deeper into the technicality of Kubernetes, maybe I want to hear from Andrew. Based on vertical and horizontal scaling, how do you see it from the infrastructure perspective?
Okay, so I think it obviously when it comes to infrastructure, it really depends on exact use case. But I don't want to give a depends answer because that's a bit vague. But in our case, when you're scaling vertically, you're talking about having one component and making that one component as large as possible to accommodate whatever traffic or requirements that you have for your application. When you're talking about horizontal, you're talking about having the minimal unit of resources and then having multiple of those, right? So from our requirements, at least at Oltranz, we find that being able to horizontally scale, first of all, allows you to minimize cost to the exact amount of traffic. So you can fine tune how much resources you're using, because you for every increment in resource requirements, you just add another instance and more. With vertical scaling, you start to enter into limitations, especially in the hardware level. You start to enter limitations of I have few CPU resources, RAM resources on my machine, and all those kinds of funny problems with storage and throughput. So horizontal scaling, I think, is preferred.
So Patrick, I want to hear how this relates to the team structure. I've heard about horizontal team and vertical team. So how does this relate to the team structure?
I think that because we're talking about software engineering, we're talking about infrastructure. So you like to know, what do you want to scale? Do you want to scale your infrastructure team, or do you want to scale your software team? And based on that, you are also going to choose the tools, right? So because if you decide to scale your software team, means that you're going to produce more. You're going to put more pressure on the infra. And then you need to ask, does the infra have the right tools with a few people to manage the demand coming from the software? So really it's about choosing the tools and deciding upfront, I want to scale the infra or I want to scale the software team.
Okay, building on that statement you made, when do you decide to scale?
That's a good question. So usually you should decide to scale not when you have problem, before. You should plan for it. So you should not scale when you have problem. You should plan for it. And then sometimes you cannot, but for the case, for example, of Irembo, we can. We know that we are saving the whole country, we are saving the diaspora. So from the moment you are developing, right, the developer needs to know that I need to write the software that can scale. The infra team needs to know that I need to deploy an infra that can scale. Right? So those two should work in parallel, like in coordination, to make sure that the choices that they are making in their design are properly adapted for scaling from the get-go. Yeah.
Okay, so Remy, the next question is for you. So I want to touch on what the young man there brought into context. You're a startup. You are building your application with 2 engineers who rarely sleep at night. Do you think they need to start thinking about scaling upfront?
Yeah, I think you need to start thinking of scaling on the first day, right? It's more of like, even if you're building your startup, you think also of how can I get more market, right? How can I get more users? And then that's why like building your application, you think at scale at first, and then you need to be at some point where even if overnight, so I run a marketing campaign and I have like 1 million users, I'm sure that my system can handle like 1 million users, right? You don't just want to wake up next day and say, okay, the system have crashed, and then you're just calling your engineers, what happened? And yeah, always thinking of scalability at first, even if building the startup. Yeah.
So what do you think about that, Andrew?
So I tend to agree with my colleagues. So the question you should ask yourself is if you want to make money with whatever application,
I think that's
whatever application you're building, right? So if you're building an application and you're really not thinking about money, it's I don't know who does that, but you may be there. But if you're thinking about building an application that has a financial implication, then someone is going, not 1 million of someone's are going to want to use your application. So like Remy said, is if tomorrow they wake up and you have a ton of traffic, right? Are you able to handle that? So from the moment that you decide to build your application, you should be thinking about what kind of, not that you should have it. I'm not saying you should have 256 gigabyte server or something like that sitting in your bedroom, right, somewhere. But you should have a scaling plan, right? If today I'm having 10 users and my projection is so on every month, what happens if I need to scale that up? I'm going to use, I already have a plan to move my infrastructure, rather my applications into a higher capacity infrastructure. It's going to take me X amount of time, all kind of stuff.
So from what you're saying, there are stages to scaling. We'll come back to that.
So just to add on, I think one of the experience we had was onboarding Irembo, and which were running like massive amount of traffic. And that was in March, so we had an incident where, so in our code base, so we had this delivery report, so we get from the provider. And then normally they flag 1 report. And then they get to a point where they had a bug with their system, flagging 4 reports. That was 4 requests, right? So you think of maybe having 200,000 requests that day, and with the telco flagging 4 requests on 200 requests, that was 800 requests. So system was starting crashing. And then we were more of like, so what can we do? So we assessed the issue was more of, now we need to separate like our delivery report to be another service. So that whenever we have like this kind of issue, so it doesn't affect the whole core platform. So that's why we went to not having a single point of failure. So we also need to think of that like part of the scalability.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that
What I
up.
would like to add is that starting with scale at the beginning is a technology leadership decision, because usually the amount of work that the developer will do to code something that is scalable and to code something that is not scalable is pretty much the same work that they will do. But then the question is, upfront, do they have the design pattern, the right design pattern? Do they have the right technology leadership to do the right choice at the beginning? Because from coding perspective, it's already the implementation. Everything is decided once you build your architecture. Yeah. So that's something to say that it's not like when you ask you to think about scalability from the very beginning, it's going to take you more time or more cost to code. It's just that we are saving you sleepless nights. Yeah.
Remy, would you agree with that?
Yes. Yeah.
So let's build on the problems you faced during your scalability journey. I think you are the first, starting from development to the production journey. So can you tell us, maybe you can use Pindo if you don't mind as a use case.
Definitely, yeah. Pindo is a very good use case, and then I've learned a lot. I think one good thing was more of, so we started from the development, like everyone can start, right? We didn't think of scalability first, so that was some of the mistake we did. So we shipped something, and then we were just maintaining. And then I think one thing which really helped us, like having issues, was having a lot of like monitoring tools that run. So you have like bug monitoring tool, API performance monitoring tool. So that at any time you like having an issue maybe with your API performance, let's say if your API is delivering a message in less than a second, and then you have now the API is delivering a message in 10 seconds, right? So having those reports like instantly can help you like go and debug quickly. So those are some of the things which really help us. And I remember, so one day, so we had like this table like in our database, and then the number of records were growing, so they get over like 50 millions. And then, so there were like a for loop running there to provide like in the payloads. And this was slowing down because there were no indexes like in a DB, like on that table, and it was slowing down the payloads. And then we have to go back and then see and then fix the issue. So I think always like while building, think of performances. And then with performances, you can have like small tools to use like Sentry for your
Maybe before we go down to it, those are parts of the solutions. Yeah. So let's say your pain points. So back to you, Andrew. So as head of infrastructure, what has been your major incident? Or have you had any incidents? Tell us.
So I've been with Oltranz for a better part of 4 years, and some of my engineers, senior engineers. So when you're talking about pain points, databases, it's one of the, I think one of the worst things to get wrong, at least from the infrastructure perspective. So one of the incidents I can recall, I think, is earlier on, before, like just like Remy here, is we started no scalability in mind, build fast, break things, that kind of mentality, and we overnight we were serving a customer who they have workloads based off of these sports activities, right? So it was Premier League night.
Yeah.
And on that night, we all of a sudden went from like just a few, less than 100 RPS to over 400 RPS, and everything, all the red lights that we had came on. The laptop was just right, fuming. And the challenge there is that we had not thought about scalability from the get-go, and now your enemy, success is your enemy, right? Mm-hmm. And you're having a ton of traffic coming in, and we spent that night manhandling applications. If you know what I mean, it's like
deeper to this.
Manhandling applications, like restart this, make sure the traffic let the traffic at least throttle the traffic, right? And from then on, that was, I think that was the worst time. And after that, obviously, there was the incident resolution the next day with very unhappy managers.
We'll talk about the resolution.
Yes,
that would be an interesting part.
After that, that's when we realized scaling is really something that should be ingrained in almost each and every part.
So Patrick, what is the price for not scaling?
I think the first one is bad reputation, right? And then when you're a company like Irembo, you are preventing people from their, I would say, their basic needs. Right? So if I take, for example, I don't know if you have people out there who are trying to apply for a driving license. So that's the main issue that we have, right? So the issue is when we have a campaign for driving license, all of a sudden you have a lot of people in the country to try to apply. And when the platform crashes, basically you are saying to people you cannot register for driving license. So, and then you are denying them from a right as a platform, right? And that's very bad. You also have the reputation damage. Irembo is not working, and that's what people will keep in their mind, because maybe it's one of the time when they interact with your platform and your platform is down, so that's what they remember about your platform, that your platform is not working, your platform is down. So that reputation damage is very critical when you are a company with the size of Irembo or with the responsibilities of Irembo. Yeah.
So do you think there is an effect on your revenue?
Sure, of course. Every second, like you can measure how much money you are losing every second when the platform is down. That's also another impact that you can measure.
That's amazing. So back to you, Andrew. How much do you think you lose per second when your infrastructure is down? Sorry for putting you on the spot. Yeah. You can give us a range.
A range. I mean, because it's hard to put a figure to it. So it depends. With that example that I gave you, so with every request per second of traffic that you're supposed to be getting, I believe, I don't know, maybe the client was supposed to be making collections, because we do payments as well, mobile money collections. The client would be making maybe an average of 1,000 francs in collections. So if you're having 400 RPS that you're not collecting, I don't know, who knows math? 400 RPS in every minute. That's 1 million.
2040, 400.
So so every minute that you're trying to resolve a problem, because you haven't thought about scalability, you're losing 400,000 every second.
That's
right? For that specific scenario, and that's not counting the damages in reputation that you're going to have after the fact, and if you lose a client altogether, right? Yeah.
Okay, so still on you. How do you know your system is not scalable from the get-go? The reason why I asked is that I could have gone to a YouTube tutorial and someone tells me this is the way to build scalable infrastructure. How do I know from the get-go that that guy is lying?
Okay, so the surefire way to know that your application is not scalable is when it crashes. But we don't want to reach that point. So the things that I keep having, the questions I keep asking my team is, what happens if you take one instance of this application and multiply it by 2, right? Are you going to have consistency across the data that is moving in that system? What happens if you multiply it by 100? Is your infrastructure going to still be able to handle that kind of load, right? So having those scenarios of, again, running through them theoretically fast, and thinking, if I have 10, 20, 1 million users, what effect does that have, right? Right now, if I'm looking at the metrics on my database, on my applications, it's showing me for 10 users, the database is loaded by X amount, right? So you just do a naive calculation, 100 times that, will my system still be able to handle that? Obviously, you're overlooking so many factors, but just napkin mathematics, right? Yes. That can give you an idea of how far you have to go to do that. Yeah, and another way to know if your system is not scalable is really just if if you watch a YouTube video and they're talking about scalability and you do not understand half the things they're talking about, then you need to revisit your you need to revisit your application and rethink it, redesign it, right?
Okay, so back to you, Remy. How do you know from the get-go, the first line of code you write, that this will not be scalable?
So I think some of the measure we do at Pindo is more of whenever we deploy something on production. So we have like a dev server which is similar to the staging server, which is similar to the production server. So we do a lot of loading tests and then see if maybe a code that's scaling, there's no bug, and then So I think that's the easiest way we see like if maybe our system is not scaling.
Okay, so Patrick, I might be wrong. You were talking about scalability in the essence of doing more with less. Some companies have huge employee base, but I don't think number relates to scalability, right? So how would you tell at the get-go that even if you have a big team, this is not scalable?
I will look at how the team communicates, how much interruptions we have in the team, and how much predictability each team has from another. So if you have an infrastructure team that does not know when they are going to do the release, it's not scalable. Whatever you are doing is not scalable. Right? If you have a software that does not have a proper CI/CD process that is automated, you have problem with scalability. Right? So those are the kind of things that you can look at: a proper CI/CD process, an infrastructure team that is really acting like a service provider to the others with clear SLA. Yes, those are very critical, because at the end of the day, software developers are very optimistic. Right? They always think that it's going to work. I did that. Right? And then you have a kind of gateway, which is the infrastructure. But before the infrastructure, you also have to talk about the QA team, test team. And then you always have the question, how can the test team test at scale? Because testing the functionality in terms of the functional aspect is one, but then making sure that it's going to work at scale with different kind of scaling scenario is another thing. And for that, you need an infrastructure for that as well, right? Because the infrastructure that you need to do a kind of just one test, oh, it's working, good. But if you need an infrastructure that is similar to the production, it also means, as I was talking about, a design choice or a leadership choice from the very beginning to invest in that infrastructure, right? That is going to stay there just to do tests, but you are going to pay a lot of money for that. Yeah, that is a choice that you need to make and to take into consideration as well.
Thank you very much. So Patrick accused software engineers as optimists. How many optimists are here? All right. So we've had a lot of pain points that you've mentioned. I think the audience, they are here to know, you face these issues, how were you able to solve them? A lot of things starts with leadership. How did you, or how are you solving the problem?
How am I solving it? Because
I should have asked, have you solved your problem?
not yet, we are on the way.
How are you solving your problem
I
correctly?
think the first thing that you are trying to put in place is documentation. Yes, documentation to be there so that everyone knows how things are working, because when you don't know how they are working, you cannot improve. If everything is in the mind of all the software, of all the infrastructure team, there's no way you can improve, because you cannot see it, you cannot touch it to say, no, this is not good, this is good. So documentation. And then you want to kind of codify the interaction between the team. The DevOps team should not be surprised that software team want to do a release. They need to know that, okay, release happen at this time, and we are expecting your PR, this, that, at this time, right? And you want also to see how well do you automate your CI/CD process, because once you start to move at scale, you want to also move fast, right? Because if you're at scale, it means that you have a demand on the market, and you need to be able to continue to respond to that demand, right? So now, in terms of CI/CD process, how independent is your software team? Do they need to talk to the infra team for every release they have to do in UAT, right? How reliable is their UAT platform, so that the QA team can also do the proper testing, the proper scalability testing, to make sure that if you have a staging platform, things are kind of, it's a mirror of the production. Yeah, those are the kind of things that you are putting in place to make sure that the team can scale. And once you have this different team, now you make sure that you have the right talents with the right skills and that they are exposed to other people. Like if you are in Rwanda and you try to handle the traffic of, let's say, a small part of Google, right? Where do you learn that? How, as a leader, do we expose our people to other people who did that before? How do we expose them to know what they don't know? Because for me, software engineers are very optimistic. They think that they know everything. But at one point, you need to show them that, look at this person, talk to this person. It will tell you things that you don't even know that you don't know. Yeah, that's really the...
Okay, so I would let you pick the next speaker. After planning around your problems, what do you think comes next? Is it the development or the infrastructure?
I think it's the infrastructure.
All right. Over to you. Tell us how you were able to solve your issues.
All right. Yeah. So definitely, like I said, leadership does come first. So just one additional point on what he said, what Patrick said is that it's good to have a leader who knows when what you have is just, I'm looking for a PC word, when it's not working, right?
Yeah.
So I think the hardest thing is to know when you're putting lipstick on your pig, and you need to stop and scrap what you have or redo it, right? So what we did was, first of all, you're building your applications because you want to be the next Google, the next Uber, the next Amazon, that kind of thing. So, but these people have already done these things, right? You need to be able to put yourself on a yardstick and say, this from where I am to where this giant is, this is the path that I have to go, and from there you look at what you're missing, right? I think that's the first thing that's the first step to take, is to know what you have to do to reach where you want to go. So apart from that, I think on the infrastructure side, it's mostly about reusability. So if you're doing one thing and it cannot be reused, you're going to have to replicate efforts every time you have to perform that action, then that in itself is not scalable, right? If you're going to spend 100 man-hours developing a specific service or deploying a specific service, and the next time they ask you to do that, you're going to spend another 100 man-hours, that's not scalable. So reusability, I think, is key there.
So from what I got, you need to have the technical know-how, and you should build things in a way that is reusable.
Exactly.
All right, so Remy, they left you behind, but I believe we are still still the builders.
Yeah.
So tell me, how were you able to solve your issues?
So for us, like as a small team, and one of the things we did was at the first go automating all processes. More of like you have CI/CD, we can deploy at any time, zero downtime deployment. So automation was more of like, so how do you like run your test automation, your CI processes, and then from your CI and then build. You also have like monitoring alerts, so which are automated as well, your Slack reports. So everything was automated at the first go because we're a team of 6 engineers. So it's more of like, we don't really have time where, okay, if let's say Mr. X has pushed the code and then it's reviewed and then it has to be deployed. So there's no time to plan maybe for like a series for deployment. So we went to the zero downtime deployments, and so that we can deploy at any time because we know that we are moving fast and then we have to break things. So whenever there are bugs actually arising, so we need to fix them as we go. So we don't have to wait for an hour or 30 minutes. So that has to be resolved. So I think like for a startup, the culture is very different from an enterprise, right? Enterprise will have like proper processes, people there, like team there. And most of the startup here, I bet like there's no startup with a DevOps like in-house, right? So maybe some will have DevOps consulting for their firm. So it's more of like automating all the processes help a lot as well. Yeah.
So based on your team, who was able to do this?
So
did you have
that was the one running all the automation like from server.
So which special skills did you need to get? Did you learn on YouTube?
Yeah, it's YouTube. So yeah, yeah, it's always YouTube, like reading a lot of docs, right? So yeah, understanding a lot of stuff, and yeah, and my background is in software engineering as well. So it was pretty easy as well to set up and with my co-founder.
So maybe digging deeper into the problem you mentioned earlier with more traffic coming from Irembo for your SMS services. And also you mentioned the point where you used the for loop and your table size was growing. Can you give us specific insights of how you were able to solve that? Which tools did you use? How did you even know it was happening?
So we had, and like the incident, was more of, we had traffic coming from like Irembo and other of our clients, and then we also had like a bulk from our carrier. So let's say the telcos, MTN and Airtel, and then it was MTN by the time. So they were sending four requests for one report, right, on delivery report. So this like, it's probably if you have like 200,000 requests in a day, so we end up having 800,000 requests. And then that was just for the delivery. And so we are monitoring like the requests coming on the platform. We're like, okay, customers are sending this amount of messages, so where are the other traffic coming? So right, and then you have to go and investigate now SMPP servers. And then that's when we saw that in the SMPP servers, which is responsible in relaying the messages, there were a lot of traffic coming from the carrier. And so one solution we did was more of like, okay, we don't need to have the delivery reports on the core platform, so we should have it as a microservice. So we shifted the delivery.
Let me just pick on that.
Yeah.
This is the first time I'm hearing microservice from this discussion. So maybe can you just deep dive a bit on what microservices are,
so like,
and how they help you?
So yeah, microservice is more of like a way for you to have different chunk of application, like separately, like right on different servers, and then it can be like a different code base, and then you have a way of like all your services to communicate together, right? And then the way it helped us was more of like, we know that like the carrier may have problems in the long run or not having problems in the long run, but one of the things was more of like, it doesn't have to affect so our current traffic going on. Yeah, so that's why we choose the route of the microservice.
Oh, that's amazing, that's amazing. So I've learned one thing today about microservices. So Patrick, this would be a hard question. You talked about a way you know scalable team is how they collaborate. So what do you think are the best ways for a scalable team to collaborate? And also, can you make references to specific tools you know has helped you in this journey? You said you are still on the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tools, no, but framework. There's a framework, a book actually called Team Topologies. They kind of give you different model of organizing your team. Yeah. So it's very interesting. You can find out on internet. But basically, one of my key takeaway from that book is really to codify the interaction, right? So that's really key, because once you start to codify, it's like for me, so I'm also a software engineer, right? But now I'm designing the architecture of the team. I'm no longer designing the architecture of the software. I'm designing the architecture of the team, the interface. I work with interface, not with implementation, right? So I think that was design pattern, you work with interface, right? So I work with the interface. I need to know exactly this team, what interface do you offer to this other team? And then once I set up all my team with the different interface, I try to do a dry run and see how things go. And if things go smoothly, I know, okay, this is good. And then my job, after that is done, is to look for bugs. So bugs, I look at how team communicates, and I see frustration on the other side. I see things that goes out of the process on the other side, and then I try to understand, fix the bug, and then we go to the initial step. Yeah. So that's basically the main point, codifying these interactions. But also making sure that the team has knowledge about what they don't know. Because if you don't know that a table should have an index, you don't know that. And it's the day you are going to have an issue, a more experienced person is going to tell you, oh, this table doesn't have an index. But that problem, you face it because you start having a lot of transactions in that table. Before that, it was okay. The database was handling it for you without an index. So how do you make sure that people know that you need to have an index on this table when they are designing their database or whatever system? So that's also a challenge of exposure. Yeah.
So we come back to exposure. that's a lot to unpack. Back to Andrew. We paused on a point, so we have to resurrect it now. We talked about stages of scaling. So can we bring it back on point?
Okay. Right, so I think your question is like, what are the steps that a company or a developer should go through when they're doing the scaling? So, this is my opinion, right? This is my experience, rather. So, the first and foremost is you need to verify the reason for scaling, the need for scaling, right? You don't scale for the sake of scaling up your applications, because first of all, the different things like Patrick was talking about is what are you going to scale? Do you want to scale the software? Do you want to scale the hardware? Do you need to scale the team itself, right? So everything, as developers, you understand everything has to start with requirements, right? So what is your requirement for scaling? And then with that, you know exactly how to approach whatever scaling you want to do, right? Then once you know what the need is, then you start to you need to identify the metrics, like Remy was talking about, is that what are going to be your identifiers for if you're scaling up? How do you know that now you're doing better, right? So things, if you talk about infrastructure, I'm going to talk about resource usage, right? My CPU has to go down within a specific threshold. It has to be less than 60-70%. My RAM same, storage same. For applications, you'd be looking at how many errors per, how many requests end up in errors in a second, right? That could be a metric as well. For teams, you'd have something different. I don't know what metrics you have for teams. But yeah, so once you know exactly how to identify when you're making progress, then you can proceed. Then you start to look for the right tools, which I think Remy is going to talk about. You start to look for the right tools to help you in this scaling journey. Then you do the research that I talked about, going out and finding out, okay, so what are other people doing to scale their applications. You look at the architecting of the solution. So when you look at the architecture of your current solution, the reason why you need to scale is because your current architecture is not working for whatever application you have intended it for, right? The use case. So you need to revisit that architecture and rework it with the goal in mind. Then from then on, it's just a lot of debugging and sleepless nights and while watching them.
Oh, thank you very much. So Remy, I'll be back to you. I believe a lot of things happen during the development life cycle. So how do you feel people should write their softwares in a way that is scalable?
Yeah, I think the first thing is more of like understanding what type of application you're building, and then so what framework you should choose. And this also like is very key because I think for us, like from an experience, right? So we chose Python because we're Python developers, and then built like our whole core system in Python. But like we realized that on the go, Python is memory and CPU intensive, right? So it's more of like you can't, even if you scale with Python, you'll be paying a lot of money like on your server. So no, I'm not scaring them. Like it's something because so our application is more of like we do a lot of queuing, like with Redis, right, and with Celery, and Celery is like very intense. And then one of the things, it's something you can really achieve with maybe like 8 cluster or 10 cluster. You can achieve the same like with 1 cluster if you're using another language. Just to give you an example, so our whole SMPP, so SMPP stands for short message peer-to-peer, so it's written in C. And then with only 1 GB, you can handle all the traffic from our Python server. So, so it's more of like, on the first go, you also need to know what kind of application you're building, and then what kind of framework or language you need to choose.
That's cool. So Patrick, based on your experience so far, What do you think is the most important thing for a company that is scaling up? A company that is scaling up, what is the most important thing they should look out for?
I will say
You said codifying, but is it really about process?
You have process, but I will say first the developer experience and observability. So developer experience is your developers need to have a very smooth experience, because when you start talking about scaling, it means that you're going to onboard a lot of people in your teams. If your current team takes 3 months to onboard someone, to make it ready to start producing code that we go live, you are not scalable, because we spend a lot of time onboarding other people. So if you assume that your team will double in the next 6 months or in the next year, and it takes 3 months to onboard someone, who is going to onboard those people? It's your team, right? So now you need to think, what should we put in place to make sure that the developer experience is quite smooth? So when they come, if they have the right background based on the hiring process, they should be able to start working in 1 month or kind of reduce, right? So you have documentation that is in place. You have how they set up their development environment that is automatic. If they need to talk to 5 people to understand, oh, add this library, take this software, this is where the CI/CD work, download this, do that, there's no way you can scale, right? So the developer experience is really important. And talking about metric, you need to monitor it, because once people are there, you need to monitor it. And then you need to put in place, you don't need complicated metrics. You can just ask your developer or your team once a month, how happy are you to work on whatever you are working, right? And you see, based on that, you can add other metrics. And because the good thing with metrics is that it pushes you to ask yourself questions. If you see that from 1 month to another is decreasing, you need to know what's happening, and then you can try to figure out. So the developer experience is really key. The second thing is observability. You talked about metrics that you observe, but also you need to know exactly what are you monitoring. You can monitor all your CPUs, but if you use, for example, horizontal scaling, a CPU can go up, but it's not a problem, because due to horizontal scaling, a new instance will be spin up and then you manage, right? So you might spend a lot of time monitoring that. When that service is down, it's not a problem. You are going to have, create a new port, and then you are ready to go. It's really important for you to know, okay, what is that I have to look at, so that when the figure is not right, people will jump.
Okay, so building on that, you are kind of in the strategy position. How have you actually found the right people to help you in this journey? Or how do you find the right people?
I don't have the answer for that. I'm still looking for them. I'm still looking for them. But you need to have a very good relationship with your P and C team. So to really be able to convey your challenges, right? You need to have a P and C team that understand your challenges. So P and C, people and culture, right? So they need to understand your challenges. They need to know the kind of people you are looking for, and they need to know where they are going to find them. So it's not easy, and in a small market like Rwanda, it's even more difficult. And in terms of culture, maybe you need to embrace the remote work.
Yeah. Building on that, you called us optimists. Do you feel there are a lot of optimists here who could serve your need?
Who?
Do you think you have a lot of optimists here who can serve your need?
I think so.
All right, optimists, over to you. All right, so moving over to you, Remy. Let's talk about, you mentioned Kubernetes, and I paused you for a while. Can you unbox Kubernetes?
Yeah.
How has it helped you?
So like as Patrick was saying, so Kubernetes help us a lot in scaling horizontally. So we don't really have to worry about CPU monitoring. It's more if you're having a lot of traffic going on our platform, so Node will be spinning automatically. And then at night when traffic is low, they will go back. So Kubernetes have helped us in managing cost in our infrastructure. So it's more we have a balanced. So it's not we have a vertical scale server where we were forced to pay $2,000 on a monthly basis. So you just go as much as the traffic is high, as we're making more money, as we're paying more for the server. Yeah.
All right. So back to you, Andrew. You talked about being able to assess the right knowledge. So how were you able to access those resources that even informed you for the need of scaling?
How assess the what?
How were you able to access the resources?
Oh, okay. Well, that's a tough question. But the obvious answer is going to be YouTube and definitely Google, who I think should be taxing every developer.
A good overflow.
But aside from that, the key thing I think I'm going to steal this from Patrick is you need to know what you don't know, right? Because if you're building something and you've never done scalability before, the only way you're going to figure out what it feels like to scale is when you are in that situation and you're scaling, which is the unfortunate thing, right? So if I didn't work for a company that went through multiple stages of scaling and failing to scale and scaling again, I wouldn't be able to understand things the way I do right now, right? That is to say that you should use your networks, right? Definitely ask people, because now probably you know Remy, you know Patrick, you know me. Definitely be able to ask someone at a different company, which is what I did. Is that, oh, okay, so you're working for this company which has a lot of resources. How are you guys doing it, right? Obviously, you don't breach your NDAs and all that, but you can get to learn something and try it within your own infrastructure, right? Then the other thing I talked about, looking up to these the Ubers, the Amazons, and what. Most of these companies actually have engineering documents online. They have Medium channels, so doing a lot of reading. You get to read the theory, but then you also get to see how the engineering teams of these companies actually solve these problems, right? One of the biggest issues we had with the what is it called? This callback hell. Yeah. We got to understand how to fix that using this event-driven engineering, and that was because we're reading.
Which specific tool did you use for event-driven?
Using Kafka. Yeah. So so Uber uses Kafka as well, right? And they handle millions and millions of requests per second, right? And well, we don't do millions, but we want to be on that way. So why not use that someone else has already figured out how to use, and it's mature enough. I think that's pretty much it. Just going around and looking for what other people have done.
So a key point I picked out is learn from the big guys.
Yeah, exactly, because that's where you want to be, right? Everyone is talking, I want to be the next Google. Well, Google does something right, right?
Yes. So, Remy, during development, which tool specifically would you use? Let's say is a startup that started this night after this event, and the person wants to build a scalable web application. Locally on your development environment, which tools can you use to get these metrics? Because the person doesn't have access to a staging server, CI/CD, where you run those automations. So what can you start with from today?
Okay, I think when you're starting building, so one of the common issue we're trying to monitor is bugs, right? I think the first tool you should start with just having a line of Sentry, a line of code from Sentry in your application, so whenever you're having a bug, so that you can quickly debug. Yeah, I think on the first stage you'll be having a debugging monitoring tool on your application. Yeah.
Okay, that's really amazing. So Patrick, you just brought me to the fact that you are an engineer, and you are also an optimist like us. So, based on your experience so far, which engineering tools do you think, or let's be specific, which languages or frameworks do you think perform well in different scenarios?
I would say on the infrastructure side, Kubernetes is really helpful. to handle the horizontal scaling. But now on the software side, I think it really depends on your needs, how much backend processing you have to do. Usually, Java is okay for web application from the moment that you have a proper Kubernetes, because Java can also be very consuming in terms of resources. PHP consumes less, but people trust less PHP in terms of security, right? So from a security perspective, people prefer Java. I think, yeah, that's the standard, Java. But then you need to make sure that you have the infrastructure to handle Java, because Java is also very time consuming. Memory consuming, yeah.
That's cool. Do you agree with that, Remy?
Very. So I really agree. And then from our experience, right? And then how Python is very like memory and CPU intensive. I wish we can have like more C developers who can code on the web. So yeah, that would be like one of the best programming language we can use for our services. But I think there's also like Golang, which is good, and then that's where we're writing some of our microservices as well, and then monitoring them. Yeah, just shifting slowly from Python as well.
I believe a lot of us here, we are smart. But let's say someone has not heard of Kubernetes until today. Andrew, how long would it take for someone to be able to learn Kubernetes? Does a software developer need to learn Kubernetes?
I'd say yes. Software developers should be able to learn Kubernetes because, I mean, you're coding your applications for Kubernetes, so seeing how the application responds to running on that kind of environment is good. Some of the steps we've had to go through with the development team is explaining how do you Dockerize an application, how does an application respond on a Dockerized environment versus on your own local machine, right? Yeah, but for your question of how long it takes to learn Kubernetes, I'll tell you when I'm done. So it's 3 years and counting so far, I guess. So,
And you're still in it?
yeah, but to be honest, it's like if I asked a developer here, how long does it take to learn a language, right? You really never
Stop.
you never stop learning the language, new concepts, and with those kinds of platforms and frameworks, it's your limitation is your imagination, right? But there's always new ways to use the framework. So understanding the basics, the resources online, you can take a month. If month is even if you're being generous and you have other work to do, right? But you can take a month, learn the basics, and start working with it. And you figure it out as you move, right?
I think JavaScript developers can relate. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for your wonderful contribution. We've spoke for quite a length.
Irembo is on track to be one of the leading and best companies to work for in Rwanda. And as such, we're a company that's looking to scale. So, for lack of seeming very pushy, we are hiring. So please take a look at all our open positions, especially for software engineer and a couple of other critical ones that we have open right now. If you're not applying, please recommend your brothers and sisters and family members. We're a very close-knit organization, and we're very friendly. But other than that, I think just in general, jokes aside, Irembo is really a great place to work. And as such, I would personally, even if I wasn't here, would recommend it as a company for you to look into. We do ensure to keep our engineers on our toes with very interesting and engaging work. But aside from that, we also have a few programs that are running that ensure that you don't get too comfortable as an engineer at Irembo and are continuously growing and have a very blissful growth path in career. So yeah, those are my 2 cents. But once again, thank you to the panelists.